Hello and welcome to my online Bible study. If this is your first time with me, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share with you my knowledge and my understanding of Bible scripture. If you are a repeat viewer, I want to thank you also for coming back and returning, and hopefully that your experience with this video will be as good as the other. Today I wanted to teach about a subject that's kind of been troubling me lately. When I first started looking for truth, God not only helped me to see truth, but kind of a side effect to that was that I also began to see error more and more clearly. So what I want to share with you today is what I've seen in today's world that causes me great trepidation. In my day, which was maybe quite a while ago, colleges and universities were supposed to be a place to discuss ideas without infringing upon one another's rights to believe what they thought was true. It was supposed to be a place that one could safely explore their search for truth. Each was supposed to be allowed to seek after truth in their own way, or at least that was the theory. It was kind of a version of the Socratic method, where through open dialogue, through questions and answers, that we could eventually come to the truth. But I also remember that at that time, people would always criticize the church in how they handled the truth, and perhaps justifiably so, and how they acted during the Dark Ages, when their draconian standard of truth was whatever they believed to be true was true, and you dare not oppose it. No one was allowed to disagree with what the church has established as truth without severe consequences, even including death. At that time, one of the truths that they established was that the earth was the center of the universe and no one could disagree, regardless of any scientific evidence that was presented. And this reminds me a lot about the story of Galileo, which you might have heard before, and his dealings with the church around the time of the 1600s, when the church was considered to be the keeper of the truth. Well, it seems like Galileo was impressed by a theory called the heliocentric universe, where the sun was actually considered to be the center of things rather than the earth. And this came from a book that he read that was written by Copernicus. And Galileo began to speak about this theory. Now, when the priests and the bishops heard about this theory, they were enraged. And Galileo was accused of being a heretic, and he was forced to either recant or to admit that the earth, in fact, was the center of the universe. Either recant or suffer imprisonment, torture, or death as a heretic. Those were his choices. Now, Galileo was simply considering another truth, something that was based upon other evidence other than the Bible, and at least what was taught by the church as the Bible. But that was certainly unacceptable to the church leaders. To disagree with the church was tantamount to disagreeing with God. They demanded that Galileo was to conform his theories to their truth, as they interpreted it from the Bible. And being religious leaders, as well as political leaders of the time, their interpretations were considered orthodox, and his, as well as anything else for that matter, different from theirs, was declared as heresy. Well, in the end, Galileo did recant. He did admit that he was wrong and that the earth was the center of the universe. But regardless, he was still placed under house arrest for the rest of his life, and he was forbidden to talk about this theory ever again. To which he agreed, and I guess what other choices did he really have? Now, this is a story about the church that was repeated by my associates many times, who are mostly atheists and non-believers. And I think it was just to show how ridiculous and how draconian the church was at that time. And I guess their point, or the moral to that story, was that no one should ever be forced to believe the truth of another under fear of imprisonment or worse. And this really wasn't the only truth and the only time that the church demanded and required everyone to believe. It was the church who forced everyone to admit that God could only be defined as a Trinity. And this was considered an absolute truth. If you disagreed, you would either be tortured until you accepted it, or put to death by being burned alive, or perhaps decapitated. Now, one such case was that of Michael Servetus versus John Calvin and the Calvinists in 1553 in the city of Geneva, Switzerland. Servetus didn't believe in the Trinity, and he wouldn't yield to the powers of Geneva, Switzerland, being John Calvin and the Calvinists. And because he wouldn't yield, his penalty was that he was to be burned alive along with his heretical writings. But this story, his story, is only one of thousands who suffered because they didn't accept the truth of the religious powers, who were also at that time the political powers. And that's important to keep in mind. Not only were they religious powers, but they were also the political powers. There was no room for debate or even discussion, since they held total power over the people, which I guess meant their minds as well. Today, many would admit that these were in fact draconian methods of controlling people by those who were obsessed with their religious views, and perhaps they were, but God will be the judge of that in the end, not me. But my question is this. Have things really changed that much? What really seems strange is that society has still not learned its lesson. But now it seems as though things have been completely turned upside down. Today, society must agree with whatever the politicians, supported by the media, of course, say is truth. Disagreement, or even saying things that could be taken as contrary to their established truths, would cause one to lose their job and possibly even be sent to prison. Certainly, at the very least, they would be considered a social outcast. Today, there's no longer freedom to seek after truth for oneself, at least openly. There's no room for the Socratic method of truth-seeking any longer. Even in colleges and universities, where finding the truth used to be paramount, minds have become closed to any other ideas than that which liberal or even conservative politicians have established already as the truth. You must seek only after their truth or suffer the consequences. I can accept that not everyone is going to believe exactly what I believe, but forcing someone to believe in my truth is not evidence of truth at all, but evidence of fear, as it was during the age of the Holy Roman Empire. People have become intolerant, not because they have the truth, but because they fear that they don't. And I see this fear all around me today. There can be no dialogue, no discussion, or any disagreement on many social issues. One must simply believe their truth or suffer the consequences. So what was mocked by many as being draconian rules of the ancient church have now become turned upside down and become the rules of society as determined by modern-day politicians. We've come full circle. As Yogi Berra would put it, it's déjà vu all over again. But this time it's the politicians who've placed themselves in the seat of God in place of the church. The new mantra is, you must believe what I'm telling you or suffer the consequences, even if you don't believe it, you must at least act as though you do. Today, someone who simply doesn't believe in another person's sense of truth can be sued and financially ruined. They can be fired from their job and even sent to prison simply because they don't agree that this is absolute truth. How is this any different than the age of the Holy Roman Empire, where they were both the religious and the political powers? They controlled the minds of everyone because they claimed that they had absolute power. Have the roles switched simply to where politicians have now gained absolute power over the truth in our minds? Must I believe in someone else's truth? Or rather, what must we believe in someone else's truth above our own? And this is what we're going to be faced with in the near future, if not already. So I guess now is the time to prepare where we're going to stand. Will you symbolically burn incense to the emperor as God, as society was forced to do back then in the ancient church, even though, of course, everyone knew he really wasn't a god? That was the question that confronted the early Christian church and will confront us in a slightly different form, perhaps a little more subtle or perhaps not so subtle. So today, politics has reached the point where their power exceeds their knowledge of truth. And to make up for it, they simply lie or make up their own truth to support another false truth, and so on and so on and so on. And with the support of the media, we hear only this false truth echoed daily, over and over again, until it appears to become absolute truth. Now, if you watched my last video, you may have learned that René Descartes believed that when a person makes decisions without having a true understanding of what they're deciding upon, they fall into sin and error. But what we see now is that when politicians make decisions without a true understanding, they not only fall into sin and error themselves, but they bring everyone else into that sin and error along with themselves. Almost every social issue today has been distorted by confusion and by chaos. And God is not a God of confusion or chaos, for he created the heavens and he created the earth from chaos by imposing his order upon it, which was the Word. And he also imposes his order upon those who believe in him. And he brings to us sanity in the midst of chaos and confusion. Remember now that confusion is a sign of deception, and we all should know who the deceiver is. Yet many have simply factored deception into their lives by redefining it as their own personal truths, their own relative truths. And this is the result of selfish ego and an unwillingness to admit when you're wrong. Now, in the letter to the Romans, Paul advises us that we're supposed to obey the government as much as we can. And although this is how we can live peaceably as much as possible under an ungodly form of government, it does not justify the governments or the politicians in the directions that they've chosen to take. No more than it justified the Roman emperors demanding to be treated as gods. So in conclusion, it's not my goal to try to force my Christian ethics and morals onto others by making them into laws of government just to make my life easier. That seems far too legalistic to me. But rather, as a Christian, my duty is to convert politicians to Christ through love, through kindness, through gentleness, through humility, and most of all, through example into Christians, so that they can be saved from the wrath of God to come. This is how we love our neighbors and our enemies as Jesus commanded. Forcing the world to conform to Christian moral and ethical standards is to create an inauthentic world, an imitation of God's kingdom, rather than something real and true. As I hope that this lesson was helpful, or at least has given you cause to think about these things. Blessings to you all, and I hope you return again soon. Thank you.